Welcome, everybody. And I want to thank everyone for attending our second town hall on FirstNet. And this is FirstNet coming to California, so we're excited and we're actually getting ready for this. So our presentations today, everybody should have gotten the handouts out in the audience, and then we have our panel members. So I'd like to walk through and introduce our panel members and get the meeting started. First, I'd like to thank the folks from Kern County who helped us put this together and actually provided this area for us. Gloria, Pauline, who's an office services specialist, Georgiana Armstrong, emergency services manager, Brent Hanley, general services division director, and Kern County Board of Supervisors for allowing us to be in their venue today. And then also each of the presenters, as we go through today's agenda, I'd like to thank all of them in advance. My name is Karen Wong. I am the Assistant Director for the Public Safety Communications Office with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And I'm also the state's point of contact for FirstNet. And the reason for the town halls and our upcoming workshop and the rest of the outreach that we'll all be doing here real shortly is to ensure that California is fully prepared for FirstNet and to guarantee that when the National Public Safety Broadband Network comes to California, it meets all of our first responders' needs. So what we're going to do today is I want to give a quick overview on FirstNet by the numbers. Brian Hobson from the there he is over there. The Department of Homeland Security will be going in much more detail. But how FirstNet came to be is back in 2012, as part of the first, what was this? I'm trying to remember what the law was. The law was signed in 2012. Brian will go over what the law was. It's not on my little cheat sheet up here. But what was signed into law was to build a national public safety broadband network for all of our first responders. And actually $7 billion was put behind this effort. And anybody that's familiar with California and our need for infrastructure, we could use $7 billion in California. And that's probably what every state like us says. So we know that there's not enough money, but this network will be built using the infrastructure that we can bring to the table. And then also will expand as more and more subscribers to the FirstNet will be using the network. We'll be using the 700 megahertz. A lot of the public safety individuals, probably in this room and listening out, the 700 megahertz broadband known as D Block was what we worked very hard from public safety to guarantee that spectrum was for public safety. That is what was signed into law for us to use for this network. We have nationwide roughly 5.4 million potential first responders. This network needs to cover roughly 3.8 million square miles, 60,000 public safety agencies, 3,250 counties, and 566 tribes nationwide. I'll look at the nation. We have roughly 5%, which is dense urban and suburban areas, 68% rural, and 27% wilderness. How much will this cost? We don't know yet, but we're working very closely with FirstNet, as all the states are, to identify what our needs are and then be able to help build what this network will cost and what it will actually do for the first responders in California and the nation. So when we look at California, as we compare to the nation, we have identified roughly 200,000 potential first responders in California that would be able to use this network. Roughly 2,100 public safety agencies, 58 of our counties, 111 tribes, 478 incorporated cities, 3,400 special districts covering 163 roughly square miles. We have 11 ports in California. The Port of Los Angeles generates over $400 billion in trade every year. and we're and it ranks in the top 10 of the busiest ports in the nation. We also border Mexico, and we have roughly 137 miles which borders Mexico. We are the 8th largest economy in the world in California. We have 5% roughly dense urban area, 81% rural, and 14% wilderness. So in California, when you look at how we stack up to the nation, we're pretty close, but we do have a lot of the topology that we have to cover. We have a lot of dense populated areas, and then we have our rural areas, deserts, very mountainous areas, and having coverage for everyone is going to be a challenge, and we know that. So what we would like to be reaching out to all of you is to participate in our workshop that's coming up, participate in the survey that was just sent out, work through our governance structure, which we put together, the California First Responder Network Board of Directors. We meet bi-monthly. We video and webcast our meetings. We have representatives from the sheriffs, police, fire, EMS, tribal, as well as other, like the CHP and CAL FIRE and other state departments on our board of directors. We also have BayRICS, which is a large Bay Area Joint Powers Agreement association with the Greater Bay Area, and LA-RICS, and you'll be hearing from Pat Mullen later on today, from the Greater Los Angeles area. So they are also part of our governance structure, and I think I probably have gone off agenda a bit. I'd like to introduce our panel members today. We have John Silliman. Oh, excuse me, he was replaced by Ross Kelly. He's on. Oh, John, oh, okay, we have you all mixed up, I'm sorry. Deputy Fire Chief for Kern County Fire, Tyler Hartley. Is he here? Okay. Ross Kelly is replacing Tyler, and Deputy Fire Chief. Scott McDonald, Captain for Bakersfield Police Department, Support Services Division Commander. And Kevin Zimmerman, Chief Deputy for Kern County Sheriff's Office. And all the bios are in the handouts that we have passed out for everyone today. For our presenters, Brian Hobson, who's the technical lead for the state plan development at FirstNet. Robert Wildman, public safety professional, Science Applications International Corp., which is also known as SAIC. Patrick Mullen, executive director for the Los Angeles Regional Interoperable Communication System, LA-RICS. Dora Beats, pardon me? Dory Beats, thank you. Planner and emergency manager for the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians. Michael Berthelot, president and CIO of Mission Manager Inc., and Brandon Smith, baton chief for the Kern County Fire Department. So with that, I'd like to get started. If we could have Brian Hobson come up and provide the first presentation.
All right, can everyone hear me? Excellent. I just want to start with saying thank you for inviting us here to have this opportunity to share with you a little bit of a FirstNet overview. I think this is a great exchange for California to be doing this, to have these outreach meetings to educate everyone on what FirstNet's all about and what your role will be in this going forward as we're building this network for public safety. My name is Brian Hobson. As Karen mentioned, I'm on the state plans team, which you may not understand what that is. Maybe at the end of this, you'll have a better appreciation for what that is. Let me start really quick. How many people had heard of FirstNet prior to the invitation to this meeting? How many people had sat in a presentation about FirstNet or have seen more information? Okay, very good. That's always helpful to understand. We sometimes, I've traveled all over the country giving similar presentations at varying levels, and sometimes we lose appreciation for, we expect everyone to kind of have the same understanding that we do on this topic. So let's start off on why FirstNet is needed. This is a picture at the Vatican, 2005, and you can see a lot of people assembled for an event there. You see one flip phone in the bottom right corner, but most people are there taking in the event, watching it. Now let's fast forward to today, 2013, for an event at the same place. A lot different, right? There's a lot more use of these devices. I mean, the smartphones and high-speed wireless devices have become so prevalent in our life today, both in our personal life and our work life, that we recognize the importance of how we integrate and leverage this technology to better improve public safety's mission. So, recognizing the need for that capability, this public safety long had petitioned for Congress to allocate funds and spectrum to build a nationwide public safety network dedicated for public safety's mission. And after several years of hard work at that, they finally were successful. And as Karen was recalling, the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, it just rolls right off the tongue, was the law that was passed to create that. It was passed in 2012, and it did a lot of key things in passing that law. It was a very high-level law, but it stated some key components to it. First and foremost, it stood up a new authority called FirstNet, the First Responder Network Authority, whose mission was to deploy, maintain, and operate the network. And in doing that, they had some key components that they needed to follow. So first of all, in deploying the network, this was going to be a true nationwide network with a nationwide architecture and nationwide approach. We're going to be working with the states, but keeping that big picture in mind. Second, the technology that would be leveraged. It was looking at new advanced technology. The technology that was selected was LTE, long-term evolution. It's a technology that was proven to be advanced and has been adopted actually globally. It's being deployed all over, not only the nation, but all over the world. It did a very important thing of allocating spectrum to public safety, so there is a significant allocation of spectrum for public safety to deploy this network throughout the nation, very critical. Was to deploy, if you're going to deploy a nationwide network, you have to have nationwide coverage. So we're looking at building out coverage, and we'll get into that a little bit more about not necessarily where commercial build-outs will necessarily be, but also to cover rural areas, as it's important for public safety, and the law specifically put mandates to ensure that rural coverage was addressed in the build-out of this network. It provided funding, so there's $7 billion allocated for the build-out of this nationwide network. Some don't think that's enough. There's also ways to generate revenue for the network beyond that initial capital investment that we'll talk a little bit about as well. The law stated that this network has to be self-sustaining, so it's going to be a very similar model to commercial models where the network is built, users pay user fees, there's other way to generate revenue, but we need to ensure we build a network that is self-sustaining so that it's not continually funded through other methods. And then finally, it specified a high-level governance board. So pretty unique to a government organization, we have a governing board that guides and directs and oversees a lot of our activity at FirstNet, which is very unique in the government sector. And that board is made up of 15 members, some of which come from the commercial sector, some of which come from the public safety sector, representing different backgrounds from technical, finance, strategy. There's a good mix to provide a very diverse board to lead this effort. So with that said, we have a very singular focus that we stay focused on all the time in our actions with FirstNet, and that is that we are the single license holder for the entire country to build out a nationwide interoperable network for public safety. So at the surface, it seems pretty clear that there's a need for a network like this, but we just want to kind of let's take a look at some specifics to the network, some of the challenges we'll have, some of the needs for it, and why this network will advance public safety's mission and enable them to perform their duties. So with the critical mission that public safety serves, we recognize that they need the best network possible. And today, relying on some mission-critical voice networks as long as commercial networks to perform their duties aren't always, especially reliance on commercial networks, aren't always sufficient to perform that mission. So we need to ensure that in building out this new nationwide network, that it meets those resiliency and reliability and the public safety grade requirements to serve public safety in their mission. So it's not going to be just another commercial network with a bunch of commercial devices. It's going to be a network built to serve public safety where they need to operate, the devices that need to operate so that they can perform their mission and save lives. So as I mentioned briefly, reliability is a key. I'm going to go into a few factors now that will kind of distinguish the network that we're trying to build to serve public safety and how it might be a little different than some of the commercial networks today. So not only we're looking to deliver just a commercial network, we're looking to deliver a full solution, really. So looking at public safety and the way they communicate with voice and video and texting and some of those services that you're familiar with today on the commercial networks. And also looking at applications. I mean, we obviously know how the push for applications and how prevalent they are in running on these networks. So it's not necessarily just these voice communications, but all the applications that ride on this type of network. Some of the services that public safety leverages from database storage, CAD, RMS, database warehousing, audio recording. Those might be things that also are a service provided by the network. And then finally, some of the unique capabilities that you may have on this network that you wouldn't have in your commercial network. For example, being able to monitor the status and the health of the network, see where everyone is. Having the accessibility and insight into the network is something that we see will be very unique to this build-out compared to what you may have today. And then finally, in doing this network, we will always have that public safety grade in mind to make sure that the communications that are delivered are mission critical. So a great example of the network requirements we may have different from, say, a commercial network is backup system. So a lot of times when commercial sites go down, it's just because they have a short backup period, where if they lose power after that, it's not a significant input. That's not what's driving the way they design and build sites. Whereas with public safety, we know that the sites may have to go on for potentially days, even weeks without power. So it's a good way to distinguish how our network will be different and some of the things we're taking into consideration in building out this network. Priority access is definitely another critical differentiation between the network that we're building and compared to commercial networks. Today on commercial networks, everyone has equal access, which means no one has priority access. With the network we're looking to deliver, we're now looking to set up prioritization so that if you get into events where there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of users, you're saturating the network, that priority can kick in and still ensure that communications are delivered to those that require those services and have priority to do so. So a good example of that was the Boston Marathon bombing, and the fact that when that initially went off, a lot of people thought that the commercial networks had actually gone down. Well, that wasn't the case. They just became completely saturated. So they could have still provided service to some users had they had priority. And so that's what we intend to do, is that when you have priority on a network, you can still, even if it does become saturated, you can still deliver services to those priority users. I mentioned a little bit that in the law, it requires the build out for rural. And this is definitely a unique requirement that we'll have in building out this network. We're not driven by profit. We have to be self-sustaining, but we're not profit-driven. So we can build out where our users need coverage the most, not necessarily where we're going to get the most return on investment. And that's a key distinguishing factor between the network that we're designing as well as in the commercial network. So that will be, as Karen mentioned in the beginning, a very strong input that we need to work with on the states and ensuring we know where public safety needs to operate most to make sure that we build out a network that supports you where you operate most. And that includes not only urban areas, but also rural areas. I mentioned a little bit about priority during the major disasters and events. It's also very important just in large gatherings where maybe it's not a disaster response, but you have a dense gathering of people and users in a certain area. And so ensure, again having necessary capacity, prioritization, preemption, those things are critical in order to support public safety and performing their mission, not only in big events or incidents, but also in special events. For example, a concert, an arena, a large gathering, a parade, some types of those events where having that priority preemption still ensures that you can get your communications through and support your mission. For a long time before the ability to support broadband data, a lot of it, this data that has been aggregated can get pushed to, say, a dispatch center or EOC, but it can't get pushed down to the end user so that they can make a determination and have that data readily at their hands. And so we see this network as enabling that a great deal, so that that information can flow all the way through the network down to the end user so that they have that information at their hands to make decisions quickly when they need to support the decision making that they need to do. So as these threats grow and we have responses that expand beyond a significant area, having a nationwide network has a lot of value in enabling users to be able to respond on the same network. So it's not saying that everyone will use the same application or everyone will use the same devices, tools, but certainly having that underlying network there, enabling people to respond, allows them to not have to worry about having that common network. So that if you take your device and you're responding in the neighboring jurisdiction or the neighboring state or across the country, because you're on a nationwide network, you'll be able to have that connectivity that you need to get to the applications that you need to do. The other thing, major benefit that we have in building a nationwide network like this is we have the ability for these economies of scale in establishing the complete ecosystem with building a network like this. A lot of people, never really envisioned what would happen with smartphones and devices and applications, but really I think a lot of people will target that once the complete ecosystem was there, the network was there, the devices were there, the need was there, the applications were there, everything fueled itself and it really took off. And we see a lot of those same parallels coming to fruition with this network as well, is that you have this nationwide network, those economies of scale, the need, applications that may be developed are no longer residing on a singular, maybe regional network, that they now have the ability to ride on a nationwide network and be leveraged by potentially hundreds of thousands of users as opposed to tens of thousands of users. So creating this ecosystem and creating this innovation will hopefully promote public safety's advancement and using some of these technologies as well, just like we saw in that initial image where everyone was holding up their smartphone to perform their duties at the event. Similarly, having this singular network allows you to, as I mentioned, respond anywhere potentially and not have to worry about if you're within the coverage footprint of your network. Today, a lot of, especially LMR systems and private systems that have been installed, obviously the coverage footprint is within the local area of your area that you commonly respond to, but you may not always respond to that. So as you expand and grow outside of that area and leverage a network like this, it knocks down those barriers so that you can respond and perform where you need to. We all know that budgets are very tight, and this leads to a lot of figuring out ways how to make the money stretch, and consolidation and different things. And this is another area where having the benefits of building out a nationwide network, we can really benefit from those economies of scale that may not be realized from say a state build out or even a regional build out. And the benefit, again, that's self-sustaining, that we're not driven by profit, that all those cost benefits that are realized can go back into the development and deployment of the network. And that's another main benefit to trying to extend the budget and ensure that we deliver a nationwide network that meets public safety needs. A common question we come up against is, what is this going to do to our LMR systems? Is this going to replace them? Is this going, how does it impact? And what we've been consistent with is this is not a replacement to LMR systems. This is a system and a capability that helps complement LMR systems. So we foresee LMR systems to be continued to be used today for mission critical voice. This technology right now does not support mission critical voice. LMR systems absolutely support mission critical voice. But what it does is enables a lot of other technologies potentially to help responders perform their job. So for example, if you have a LTE device on a FirstNet network with broadband capability and you're a firefighter responding to an incident, having that ability to download large files may enable you to download the floor plans to the area you're responding. Or on the scene of an incident, having sensors that can then pass information back through the network to other people that need to know for that situational awareness to see whether biometrics or location information. So spreading situational awareness or streaming video. Streaming video is one of those ones that commonly is associated with high-speed networks. And there's a lot of potential needs and how that can enable and improve communications and the ability for first responders to perform their mission. So we recognize that we have a few challenges ahead of us in building out this nationwide network. It's not going to be easy. Building out a nationwide network with the amount of coverage that's desired, with the amount of users that we'll have, the funding limitations is not an easy task to undertake. And that's why we see a lot of critical things that we need to undertake. Establishing partnerships with state and local first responders to understand their needs, critical with the industry to potentially leverage infrastructure as much as possible, critical. The law stated that we were to build out this network the most economically efficient way possible. So it didn't necessarily envision building out a brand new standalone network from the ground. It envisioned several partnerships and leveraging existing infrastructure. I've even heard some people say that if FirstNet were to build a single new site, then we may have failed at our mission, because there's so much existing infrastructure out there that there should be enough to, if we strike the right partnerships, to leverage some of that infrastructure. And then finally, as I mentioned, gathering the input from the states is critical. So we need to know what you need, where you plan to operate, so that we can build a network that meets your needs. Without doing that, it's hard for us to be self-sustaining, because if we don't get users to come onto the network, there's no requirement for anyone to use the network. If we don't get those users to come to the network, we don't generate revenue, we're not self-sustaining, and we've failed in our mission. So California is a great example for this, that we have a lot of unique coverage requirements across the country. This is very prevalent. California is very different than, say, a Delaware or Wyoming, where you've got pretty much all ranges of this, from dense urban all the way down to wilderness or very remote areas. And this is something that we recognize in building out the network, and that we need to be innovative in the way we approach this network, and are looking at different ways that we could potentially do this that may be a little bit outside the box compared to how commercial networks are built today. So for example, the use of satellite. Maybe there's a satellite component to this network that allows for coverage of devices, or allows you to take a network on the go to cover some of those areas. We call them boomer sites, a really high site that commercial users typically wouldn't use, because it's the need for those. We put them out in rural areas, and there's no return on investment for them. However, the technology supports it, and it makes good business sense for us to be able to support those users in rural instances. So deploying those large sites is something that might be unique with the deployment of our network compared to what you'd see with other networks. This is just a sequence of slides that just shows just how much this landscape is evolving throughout the country. So this is going to step us through every quarter, taking a snapshot of what composite LTE coverage looked like throughout the country, starting back in 2010 all the way up to a current quarter of 2014. And you can see that the network of current LTE deployments has grown significantly. And so that's why the more we can leverage and strike existing partnerships to leverage what's already been done, it brings a lot of benefits to us. It lowers costs, it allows us to expedite and build out a network more quickly, and really deliver the capabilities to users rather than having to start from scratch. So as I mentioned, leverage in industry, the existing infrastructure, the benefits of having a global standard, the economies of scale, that it's already built and maintained, but at the same time not forgetting that we have unique public safety requirements for hardening, for devices. Cybersecurity is a big one, making sure that the network is secure. Applications unique to public safety. So we recognize the differences as we build out this network. This is a high-level kind of conceptual approach just to kind of help people get a better appreciation. A lot of times we run into times where people don't fully understand kind of the approach, and I am an engineer, so I've tried to sneak a couple engineering slides or more technical slides in there. So say there's an existing network. We just showed that coverage footprint of the entire country of all the pre-existing LTE build-outs throughout the country, right? So if FirstNet recognizes that we want to strike some type of partnership or make an arrangement that we can leverage some of this existing infrastructure, and we're not trying to build on our own. So if we do have a partnership deal and we can build out at some of these same areas, you can see that we start to get and realize some of the same coverage footprint as we deploy that public safety radio equipment. So it's leveraging the existing tower sites, the existing maybe antennas, but putting our own public safety equipment that leverages this new spectrum that's been dedicated to public safety. And we may not build out at all the same sites because we don't have the same capacity requirements. We're not trying to serve 100 million users like the commercial networks are. We're trying to serve the public safety community, so maybe we don't need to deploy at all sites. But we would certainly want to deploy at sites where it would make sense, where there's a common need for coverage. After we do that, if we deploy devices that are capable of operating both on this new public safety band as well as the commercial partner band, or whatever the partnership band is, then these devices are capable of operating on both networks. It allows for another layer of reliability. We obviously know that there's going to be a different need for public safety. So after maybe we've deployed this baseline, we can expand out and start to build out new sites, or concurrently build out new sites, or leverage existing sites where there's a specific public safety need, but maybe not a need for that partner that we've struck. And then finally, we recognize that there's going to be just areas that are so remote that it maybe doesn't make sense to build out a tower. It's just not cost effective because we are financially restrained. So looking at commercial technologies of how you can take the network on the go, move it out to some remote area, rely on that satellite connectivity to still have connection to the network, but still serve that local area depending on where you deploy. And then similarly, you can take these types of rely on that satellite technology or whatever that overlying communications is, and then deploy vehicles like that to local areas to help offset capacity needs. So the law stated several things, as I mentioned before. It also stated that we're required to consult with the states on a select amount of topics. We recognize that it's important for us to do that if we're going to be successful in building a self-sustained network. And so, although the law stated we have to consult on these topics, we're definitely looking at consulting on many more. So, however, the law does state that we need to consult with the states on a minimum of these things, which includes where we deploy the equipment, where we're going to place those towers, which drives the coverage, certainly the coverage areas, the need for coverage within each state and territory, adequacy of hardening, security, reliability, resiliency, so achieving that public safety grade. Priority, how do you want to assign priority on the network, knowing that that's a critical component of ensuring that you have prioritized traffic on the network. Selection of users, we don't know who all the users ought to be on the network. That's something that locals know best on who ought to be the appropriate users on this network and who is representing an approved organization. And then finally, training and how are users going to be trained. So that development of the state plan, which is what that is the group I work with, and that development will take place in a consultation process. The consultation process is done with each state. It's very iterative. We've just started it. We actually did our very first of potentially, we're looking at 5 meetings per state and territory, so that's 280 total meetings. We've done one in Maryland last month. And so throughout this process, this is the opportunity we plan to communicate, coordinate with you, gather those inputs and needs, then share with you kind of at what stage we are in developing the state plan. What is this network going to look like potentially in California? And at the end of the day, when we've gone through this process of having these meetings, coordinating with the state, we will deliver a final state plan. That state plan goes in front of the governor for ultimate approval or signature. And if the plan is signed, we go forward with building out the network. And if it's not, then the states have the ability to opt out and attempt to build this network on their own. But still tie back into the nationwide core, so to ensure that there's still a nationwide network. So finally, I know it's a lot of information. Some of it may have been fairly new, some of it may not have been. We're trying to continually update our website and promote some of our communications and outreach and education on our website. So if you haven't been there before, firstnet.gov, there's a resources section that has a lot of presentations. There's a section on consultation. There we have a Twitter account, Flickr account. There's a lot of different ways depending on how you want to gain access to the information, but you can find it there. And with that, I will take any questions.
Do the panel members have any questions? Okay. Okay, and we will be getting public comment at the end of the meeting today. So we'll move on to the next presentation.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is FirstNet in California, the next steps.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Weidman, and I'm with SAIC. And you've just heard Brian tell you about the federal perspective as the process moves forward. So now we're going to take this down another notch to what does that do in the state of California, and how do we deal with it at this particular level. We're going to talk a little bit about the vision for FirstNet, FirstNet for fire services in particular, the governance arrangement of FirstNet in the state of California, education and outreach, designing for coverage, which is an important step. And lastly, another very important step is managing expectations about what happens as we go forward, what's possible and what's reasonable and what's practical. So FirstNet, the vision, and to reiterate what Brian had said, is to provide emergency responders with the first nationwide high-speed wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. Some of you might be thinking, don't I have that now? Don't I already have a wireless broadband high-speed system? And many of you do. It comes from a commercial provider. You get it from Verizon, AT&T, you get it from Sprint, or you get it from T-Mobile. If you have vehicles and devices that are connected to your own systems and your own agencies, your record management systems, or to query of databases and so forth, that data is already moving in some sort of way. So if that's the case, what are we fixing? Well, again, what we're fixing is who has priority in this system? Will the system work when you most need it to? Or are you dependent on whatever happens with the circumstances of the commercial network? As Brian had pointed out, there have been a number of circumstances around the state in which the systems have essentially gone down, not technically, but you don't get to access it simply because it's overloaded. And if that happens and it's critical and you're relying on it, you're in a difficult way. The system is going to have a number of significant pieces that are critical to this process. Among them are communications, applications, capabilities, and services. The communication, of course, what's going back and forth. The applications. What applications do you use in your business? What applications are needed for multi-agency, large-scale event response? And what applications are needed in your day-to-day routine business? Those are all very important. We don't all respond to major events, major calamities each and every day, but we do business in the ordinary way each and every day. And we need to move data as a part of that as well. Capabilities. What can be moved back and forth? Well, essentially, if it can go across the internet, if it runs on an internet protocol, then that's part of the capabilities that should go with this. And services. What sort of services are going to be available? The application and services side of this is a particularly important process. It's also particularly important when we look at how will it be done when we balance the issues of ease of use and serviceability with security. Can we prevent people from hacking into the system? If people hack into the system, can they get into your agency records and information? Also very important. Imagine with services that might be available for fire services. 1- and 2-way streaming of video and in-field identification of personnel and assets. Large file transfer, such as floor plans, high-resolution photos, heat maps, evacuation plans, multimedia command and control, situational awareness, including asset personnel tracking, dynamic mapping, remote control of robotic devices, tie-ins with next generation 911 and information that comes into the dispatch centers in that way, database queries, and of course field reporting, which is another one of those day-to-day sort of activities. Let's talk a little bit about governance. This is a key issue. Many of you already use shared services in one way or another with neighboring agencies as part of a city or a county. That requires governance. Joint powers authorities have to be set up. There has to be shared input onto what we do, how we spend money, and so forth. So that's going to be the case here as well. In this particular case at the federal level, the Federal Communication Commission is the owner of the 700 megahertz frequency that is going to be allocated to the FirstNet process. Where did that come from? And if any of you have tried to expand your existing land mobile radios, you know that getting licenses for new frequencies are not easy to come by, no matter what the spectrum is. So where does this come from? Well, it came from the switch from analog television to digital television. Getting rid of the analog freed up spectrum, and as a result, 20 megahertz of this 700 megahertz range was allocated to public safety. The National Telecommunication and Information Administration, or NTIA, is involved in this as part of the Department of Commerce, and it is the administrative arm over the FirstNet board. Now, many of you may or may not be aware that the FCC controls frequencies in the civilian sector, and that includes the frequencies that are licensed to public safety providers across the country. The NTIA does that same job for licensing spectrum to federal agencies. So in this case, these two entities are going to have to work together to make this all work out as well. NTIA, again, as the umbrella, selected the FirstNet Board of Directors. FirstNet is actually the board of directors that provides the top level of governance to this particular process. The First Responder Network Authority, and as you see on the screen here, the people on here, the membership of the board is specified by the original federal act. It includes the Attorney General, the Director of Homeland Security, and the Director of the Department of Commerce, as well as other appointed people to represent factors that are important in this particular process. They include representatives from law enforcement, from fire services, from EMS, and because of the complexity and the technicality of building out this network, it also includes a number of people with experience essentially working for the carriers in cell phone, such as Verizon or AT&T, Sprint, or T-Mobile. What they know about building systems is important. At the state level, the authority rests essentially in the governor's office, and how the governor goes through spreading that out is also important. The governor's office is going to be the one that is tasked with the decision to opt in or opt out. And as Brian had touched on, that's a very important decision. Either the state of California decides to agree with the plan and invite the FirstNet Authority and to invite the federal level in to build the system, or the state says, nope, we're going to build the system on our own with our own money in our way that also then will tie in and meet the specifications that are required in the Act. Okay? The Act does not give any state the option to say, no, we're just not going to do it. What's supposed to happen is either it's done at the federal level in cooperation, or the state does it on its own. I'm not sure many states are going to say they're going to do it on their own and spend their own money. Not very likely. The California Office of Emergency Services is, and we're fortunate to have Karen with us today as the state single point of contact in this process, provides the administrative support and the planning behind a governance board created in the state of California called the California First Responder Network Board, or CalFIRN for short. Similar to the federal approach, the First Responder Network Board is comprised of representatives from stakeholders that are all relevant to this particular act. It includes the emergency services or emergency management organizations. It includes state departments that have a stake in this particular process. It includes representatives from the California Fire Chiefs Association. It includes representatives from the California State Police Chiefs Association and the California State Sheriff's Association. And it also includes representatives from the tribal outreach process. It's intended to be a broad board to create input from a variety of stakeholders who all have an important voice in building this to work for the state of California. The California First Responders Board also has an authority to create subcommittees to further enhance the process of input into the decision-making process. As you can see on the chart, it includes such entities as the State 911 Governing Board, the Mutual Aid Regional Advisory Committees, the California Statewide Interoperability Executive Committee, or CalSEC, which of course has been working hard since in the post 9/11 era to create interoperability in land mobile radio systems. While this is different than land mobile radio, of course what we find is the stakeholders involved in FirstNet and the stakeholders involved in land mobile radio interoperability are often the very same people. It's also included the recent creation of a tribal advisory committee, a very important addition to this particular process. And there may be other subcommittees that are created as the process moves forward. Communicating with FirstNet is a process that is going to be similar to shared governance, which is found in a number of other federal to state programs. Concept being that there is governance at the federal level. The federal government reaches out to states through essentially a single point of contact, and then the state, through that point of contact, reaches out to individual counties, cities, and other stakeholders to bring information back in something of a spoke to a wheel sort of a particular concept. In this particular case, FirstNet will do its communication through the state single point of contact, as designated by the governor's office, our very own Karen Wong. From the single point of contact, that information then flows to the board, through the CalFIRN board, and CalFIRN is created to exist to create that communication back and forth with the various stakeholders at the city, county, tribal, and other stakeholder level. Next steps for California. What do we do next? The Governor's Office of Emergency Services is responsible for representing California public safety at the federal level. Under the NTIA SLIGP grant, and SLIGP, in case you're not speaking federalese today, stands for State Local Implementation Grant Program. Cal OES is responsible for building the National Public Safety Broadband Network and for FirstNet awareness in California. And one more time. In executing the outreach requirements of the grant, the Office of Emergency Services has formed a core team, and you've probably met several of those here today. Karen and her staff have worked hard to present these town hall meetings, and this is part of that core team's activity. They've hired a public safety broadband consultant. In this case, it's Science Applications International Corporation, the company I represent here before you today, and we're working with them and sharing our experience and trying to help move this process along. OES has held team kickoff and planning workshops. They've developed an education and outreach plan, which is being executed here today. They've developed presentations, flyers, and outreach material, which may help you understand the process as you move forward and explain it to those that you also need to communicate with. Conducting town hall meeting webcasts. This is being recorded today. In addition to providing access to those remotely through a WebEx, it's also being video recorded and will be available through the OES website as a YouTube link to review and share with others as well. And working with the Department of Homeland Security Office of Emergency Communication to schedule coverage objectives workshops. Coverage objectives is a big deal. I believe that workshop has been scheduled for August 26th, if I'm not mistaken, of this year. So that'll be coming up pretty soon. We heard Brian talk about the process of state meetings, and of course that's Brian's job, is to coordinate the issues of state plans. And he said it's an iterative process, of course, meaning that there's going to be version 1 and version 2 and version 3 and perhaps version 4 and 5 and so forth. The reason for all that is because things change. We think of things later we didn't think of today. How many of you have been involved in implementing a technology project at your agency? Did it change? Oh yeah. Once it starts rolling out in its first form, did people start coming and go, hey, why can't we add this? Or why didn't we make it do that? Well, it's a great idea. Why didn't you tell us about that to begin with? Well, I didn't know. I didn't think about it. But I know now. That's going to happen in this process as well. That's a big deal. This particular chart that you have on the screen is a chart for describing the steps in this iterative process of working with states that FirstNet has come up with. Obviously, it's complicated. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot to be done in this particular process. What most affects the state as we go forward at this point is that center track, the one in yellow. And at this point, you can see that there are different columns at the top, starting from the top left there saying preparation. We're kind of between the first and second steps in that. There's a long way to go. We're right early on in this particular process. There's a lot to do just before the initial consultation, let alone what happens after that consultation. That's the purpose of this outreach process as it starts now, is to help you be aware, help you start thinking about the process so that the input you have as we move forward is the most informed it can be and the most helpful it can be. Key steps in this design process. And of course, all systems like this are dependent on how well your system delivers, 1, coverage, and 2, capacity. The land mobile radio systems you're used to using are entirely dependent on that. Does anybody have a land mobile radio system that gives you complete coverage in every place you ever want it to at any time? No. I've asked that question to lots of folks in lots of places, and I've never got anybody go, yeah, ours does. It doesn't happen. This is another radio system. It's not a voice radio system. It's not a land mobile radio system. But the information that we're talking about, this broadband high-speed network, still is going to move information by radio waves. And as a result, coverage and capacity are going to be the keys that we have to live with. The question is, as we've heard, there's $7 billion. There's 3.8 million square miles to deal with in the country. Is it going to work the same in every one of those 3.8 million square miles? No, it isn't. There are going to have to be trade-offs. We got to think about those trade-offs. Brian showed us a great chart as we went on depicting the growth of LTE coverage in America. And it's grown a lot. California has excellent coverage. Were there white spaces with no coverage in California? Yeah. That's still a problem. So, when you think about we need all the coverage we want and all the data we want in every place, there's still white spaces. We got to consider that. What are we going to do about the white spaces? If those are covered in satellite deployables, you have coverage. Will it be as robust as you're going to have in a major, dense urban area? Well, no, but you have coverage. But those are trade-offs as they exist. So the guiding principles as we go forward are heavily involved in understanding what the trade-offs are, what's important to you as public safety users and responders in California, and how do you get your voice heard about what you really need. That's where we're trying to go here. Coverage objective workshops have been done in many states. This particular map comes from the Office of Emergency Communication, and it's a preliminary attempt at taking a look at some of these things. This information comes from census information, and it depicts where the densest population is in the state of California, and that's shown in the darker green colors on there. Is that the only place you need coverage? No, but it's the starting point. Obviously, you got to serve your populations. That's important. That needs to be then overlaid with information about where we have important critical infrastructure, and what would those be? Well, there are things like schools, there are things like ports, there are things like transportation centers, Amtrak stations, and so forth, and those need to be considered in where we set up our process. Lastly, help us manage expectations. First off, and let's remember this again, LTE is not a replacement for LMR technology. LMR will continue to provide mission-critical voice communication for the foreseeable future. If any of you deal with boards of supervisors or legislators that allocate money, it's tempting for them to hear something about this and decide they don't need to invest in LMR into the future. Very dangerous. Can't let them do that. The LTE data network introduces new capabilities to assist the first responder in many ways. Somewhere in the future, LTE may help us get across the idea of keeping two systems apart. It may provide a robust enough communication to replace LMR. May. We haven't seen it yet. This chart was developed by the Office of Emergency Communication to depict how these things might converge. But again, on this chart, just like the one we saw previously, we're far to the left on this chart still. It's a long way to go to get to the point on the right where they all converge. Thank you for your attention. Again, I'm Bob Weidman, and I'll be happy to take any questions from the panel.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Our next presentation is Early Adopter and Local Perspective.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Pat Mellon. I'm the Executive Director for the LA RICS project. We're going to, some of these slides are going to reference LMR. The reason for that is that clearly going back to 13 years ago next month, when we had the attack on New York and the Pentagon, the need for interoperable communications really came to the forefront. And in Los Angeles, we have 10 million residents, covering a little over 4,000 square miles. Within serving those 10 million residents, we have 81 different public safety agencies, and they operate on 40 different radio systems. So the interoperability is just kind of all over the map. In addition to the 34,000 first responders, we have 17,000 to 18,000 secondary responders. And just try to imagine, answering a fire where you have livestock that needs to be evacuated. You've got animal control that you need to bring in. They're secondary responders. When the rains come 3 or 4 years ago in California, and you get after the fires, you get the mud flows. Who's going to clean up the streets? It's going to be public works or the road departments. Those are secondary responders. We feel that that's imperative that they be included in with the system. So, clearly the need for interoperability across the 34,000 first responders and 81 agencies became extremely important. The LA RICS project actually predates the FirstNet legislation of PL 112-96 or .96. We go back to about 2009 when we did start the effort to build an interoperable LMR system. In 2010, we applied for and received a grant through the NTIA for $154.6 million to build out on 10 megahertz of broadband spectrum as one of the early adopters or early builders in the country. Things kind of changed in February 2012 with the signing of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Jobs Initiative, HR 3630. It resulted in NTI freezing our grant. Their interest was to have FirstNet have the opportunity to be stood up and determine what the national architecture was going to be, so whatever we built in Los Angeles would be compatible with what's being deployed in the rest of the country. At the same time, that happened and the NTI froze our grant. We put our open procurement on hold. Really upset some vendors that had spent a lot of money putting together some proposals, but that's our job. And then in August, our board ultimately made a decision to split the procurements. The procurement that was issued in the latter part of 2011 was to build one LMR LTE system by one vendor. And with the unknown direction that FirstNet was going to go and the need to move forward with the land mobile radio system, again, to try to bring those 81 agencies together under at least some kind of a common umbrella, they split the RFP into two. Going along with the activities of all these procurements, we were faced with a daunting task of how do we deal with California Environmental Quality Act. California law says if you build one site, you have to have that cleared. You build two sites, you have to have both of them cleared. You build 230, every single one of them has to be cleared before you can start on the first one. So we were told by NTIA that unless we found a way to expedite the California process, they would not begin the NEPA process, which was critical in moving forward with any part of the project. We were fortunate in being able to push through AB 1486 with now Senator Lara, that allows LA RICS to proceed with a limited CEQA exemption, and I'll cover that in just a minute. So time-wise, we issued a new LMR RFP in October 2012. We received a couple of proposals in January. The new LTE proposal RFP was put out in August of 2013. About the same time, we did enter into a contract for the LMR system, and then in March of this year, we entered into the contract for the LTE system. Looking at HR 3630 and its impact on the LMR system, in addition to giving the now 20 megahertz of broadband spectrum to public safety, it also directs the sale, the auctioning of the T-band frequencies. In Los Angeles, those 81 different public safety agencies, the vast majority of them operate on over 600 channels in T-band. In 2021 to 2023, those are auctioned off. We met with the FCC. The FCC said, geez, we don't know where you're going to go. We certainly hope that you have an idea. But if you do build on T-band, you do so at your own risk, because right now Congress says we have to auction those channels off. And somebody might ask the wisdom of Congress why they would impose that kind of a restriction. Well, T-band only affects 11 jurisdictions in the country. But those 11 jurisdictions are New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, Miami, Dallas, Philadelphia. Just small jurisdictions. So anyway, 3630 is supposed to provide some funding and spectrum to move off of the T-band, but in California, trying to build an LMR system in 2 years is never going to happen. So 21 to 2023, you've got to design, get through CEQA, and build a whole new system. Not going to happen. Okay, I talked about AB 1486, the limited CEQA exemption. Basically what it does is if it's on a police station, sheriff's station, fire station, or existing public safety or existing transmitter site that's publicly owned, we have an exemption from compliance with the CEQA processes. We do have to address some of the environmental considerations. You know, if somebody built a fire station in wetlands, we can't build there. We do have some public facilities that are next to open fields overlooking the Pacific Ocean where we've got nesting birds at certain times of the year, so we have to work around those. But to the greatest extent, we have identified 230 plus sites that do meet the limited CEQA exemption, and we're moving forward with that project. As I said, HR 3630 did impose some pretty significant restrictions on the T-band. It did result in us having to step back and look at what we were going to deploy from the LMR perspective. And as both the previous gentleman had mentioned, the LTE system is going to do great things for data. In some point in the future, it will do great things for voice over LTE, for routine communications, but it is not going to replace critical communications for probably the rest of my lifetime. So we needed to build a system that would comply with HR 3630, still meet our land mobile radio requirements because of the need for critical voice communication. So we looked at what spectrum we had available to replace the T-band. We looked at 700 and 800, and if we gathered every single channel in the 700 and 800 spectrum, the narrowband spectrum, that was available to public safety, we didn't have anywhere close to the 600 channels that we've got in UHF T-band, even going to phase 2. We ultimately settled upon a hybrid solution, which, and stepping back to the 700 and 800, the other problem was that it was going to cost almost $250 to $300 million to forklift replacement all the radios that were in use throughout Los Angeles County, all the public safety agencies. And there was no funding for those. So in addition to building a brand new system, everybody would have had to replace their user equipment. So we did settle on a hybrid system that utilizes 90 channels in 700. Minimum of 90 channels, and we currently have about 104, and we're trying to get some additional ones, as well as 160 channels in UHF T-band under a digitally trunk voice radio system. We have enough capacity to support the first responders, as well as the 17,000 to 18,000 secondary responders. For the LMR system, we received 2 proposals in January 13. We negotiated and did the red pencil work on the contracts through June and July. And in August, we executed a contract for the LMR system. It's divided up into 5 phases. We're still just wrapping up phase 1, which is the detailed design. We go into construction as soon as our environmental impact report is complete, because we do have some sites on the LMR system that do not meet our CEQA exemption, such as they're in the national forest. And because they're in the national forest, every single site on our system has to go through an EIR. We do have a number of phases that we can give unilateral approvals to move forward with, so we can really stop the project or slow it down at any time, depending on how our grant funds are flowing. And we do anticipate that we can build out the LMR system entirely using federal grant dollars. The LMR system consists of about 88 sites. 55 of them are lattice towers, 33 of them are monopoles, 70-foot monopoles, to provide some additional enhanced fill-in coverage, particularly on the 700 narrowband frequencies. As I said, the CEQA and NEPA clearances are required for all the sites on the LMR system. It does use a P25 a compliant controller. If one agency is on the UHF system and another one is on the 700 system, through the controller, you won't know which band they're on. It'll bring the two together. So it does allow a slow migration, allows the agencies to begin migrating off of UHF when they buy new radios to buy 700 band radios. And they'll still continue to operate on both systems. This is a great, and this slide actually came from SAIC in a previous presentation, but it was so good. This really kind of shows how the coverage of the LMR versus the LTE systems are. You know, we've got 88 sites for the LMR system. We have over 230 sites in the LTE. The LMR system covers a lot of the national forest and the Santa Monica Mountains. The LTE system doesn't even get into it. So you can kind of see the difference in how much smaller the coverage is between LMR and LTE. So for the LTE, as I said, we got a grant of $154.6 million in 2010. 3630 absolutely dealt us a significant setback, but you know, we're moving forward. We were required to execute a spectrum lease agreement with FirstNet. That took a little bit of time, and we were finally able to get that executed in July of 2013, resulting in the lifting of our suspension. We released the RFP in August of that year. I think the key date here is that our grant expires on September 30th of 2015, and we are doing everything we possibly can to get every single site built before that. We have an 18-month program. It's extremely aggressive, particularly when you recognize that all the sites are publicly owned sites. Some of them are owned by the county, about 100. Some of them are owned by the city of Los Angeles, about 60. But the remainder are owned by individual cities. So we have to negotiate a site access agreement with every single city independently. One of the requirements of the Spectrum Lease Agreement was to identify some key learning conditions. The idea here behind the grant is to be able to provide a learning base for the rest of the country. Ours was to see how we could bring onto the system a secondary responders, including perhaps even some public utilities such as Southern California Edison or LA City's Department of Water and Power. They are also part of the response to emergency situations, particularly when you get the winds or the fires and knocks the power lines down. It gets everybody's attention when their freezers stop working and they start losing their food. So the idea here was to see what we could leverage, allowing some users onto the system to use it as a user, not to sell the excess capacity in exchange for, say, using some Southern California Edison's fiber or LADWP's fiber for some of the backhaul connectivity. Unfortunately, what we've found, particularly from the commercial providers, is they're really, really interested in leasing you the fiber. They're not really interested in using the system, at least until it's up and running and you can demonstrate to them what your coverage is going to be. So our key learning condition is to try to identify partnerships that we can use, whether it be with the public utilities or some of the secondary responders I discussed earlier. One of the things that Craig pointed out earlier was to identify an ability to dial back quality of service or preempt users on the system so that if we do have a major event, we can dedicate the spectrum to those specific users as opposed to somebody else like Southern California Edison that wants to read meters or operate their smart grid. So our second phase of our KLCs is to develop some kind of a network congestion identifier, as well as determine some kind of a mechanism to dial back the quality of service or degrade quality of service to those second and third tier responders. And then last, to do some test and validation on the NIPSTIC's priority and QoS requirements. Throughout Los Angeles County, we have 229 monopole sites. 228 of them are CEQA exempt, and so actually we've only got 228 because we dropped the one. The NEPA clearances are still required. We're working with NTA on that. Our heights for the monopoles vary between 28 and 70 feet. The 28 feet, particularly along the coast, where the Coastal Commission enters into the picture. And we do have a number of sites, 27 of them, where the monopoles for the LTE system will also be used as fill-in sites for the LMR system. So we'll actually be co-locating there. From your handout, this slide has changed as well as the next one. I was supposed to have somebody from County Fire, but stuff happens as it normally does. And you can see him standing right next to me here. So, benefits from a broader public safety perspective is we need to provide interoperable communications. We do anticipate that we can use the LTE system for data. We do need the LMR system for voice. Our strategy on the deployment, particularly as we get towards 2023 and we have to vacate T-band, we've absolutely got to have voice over LTE for routine communications, and thus saving those 100 or so channels on the 700 narrowband for the critical voice. A interoperable region-wide system obviously makes maximum utilization of the spectrum, which is extremely valuable these days, as well as to minimize your OpEx cost. Cross-jurisdictional communications is absolutely essential. I found that fires don't adhere to political boundaries, nor does our criminal element. As well as this with the LTE system, the LA-RICS LTE system will integrate with the National Public Safety Broadband System that's being built by FirstNet. The part that my partner was supposed to cover was the specific benefits that the LA area fire departments are looking at. First one is obviously very important, although it kind of trips into the EMS, is the electronic patient care reporting systems, EPCR, as well as the next generation incident command system that the fire agencies are so adept at using, as well as providing some cellular telephony for the fire services. I believe GPS, personnel tracking was mentioned earlier. Live video feeds, particularly if you have a large-scale brush fire, to be able to put up an aircraft to be able to show the limits of the fire would be extremely important, and you can beam that information right down to the command post. It was also mentioned a little bit earlier about the capabilities of looking into your building department's files for floor plans. That would apply not only for fire, where they might be storing hazardous material, but clearly for a special weapons team, it would be nice to know the floor plans of the houses before they inject themselves. CAD to CAD interconnectivity, next gen 911. It would be wonderful to have that information flow directly to the first responders, as well as a remote command and control for critical dispatch. So with that, if there's any questions?
Any questions from the panel? I just have one comment to make. We are very fortunate in California to have an early adopter program. The comments that Pat was making regarding the infrastructure are real, and we need to be kind of looking at that as we look at the infrastructure we have in California. While it might look like it's there and easy to use, there's a lot of complications as to who owns it, how do we get access to it, is there even space in the vaults or on the towers?
Yeah, you triggered a thought that I had while Craig was up here talking. He said, FirstNet's goal was to not build anything. Our goal is to build everything. Reason is when we first started looking at the LA-RICS system, we were going to go to the commercial towers. Commercial towers rent, a cheap one rents for $1,500 a month. If it's across the street from the Staples Center, it probably is $12,000 a month. At $1,500 a month, our OpEx cost just to rent cell towers was $4 million a year. FirstNet has a great advantage in that they have since they hold a license to the spectrum, they can leverage that spectrum in the quid pro quo to allow access onto the poles. We don't. We don't have that, and so therefore our only option was to use the grant dollars that we've got to actually build the system, build the infrastructure so that we didn't have to pay a continuing OpEx fee. We do anticipate that there will be some roaming requirement, but it'll be minimal, by comparison. So FirstNet's got a heck of an advantage in that they've got the spectrum that they can leverage. All we had was the underlying property that the governmental agencies owned. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for expanding on that. I was hoping for that. Thanks, Pat. With that, it is now 2:20, so we will take a 10-minute break, so if everybody can reconvene at 2:30. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Our next presenter is Tribal Perspective.
Thank you. Michixus, my name is Dory Beats. I am northern and southern Miwok. I live and work on the Tuolumne Rancheria, which is in Tuolumne, California, Tuolumne County, and I am currently the planner and emergency manager for the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians. Tuolumne, of course, was home to a pretty big event last year called the Rim Fire, and if any of you were there helping us out, I appreciate that. Our tribe was very exposed and participatory in the management of that event and hosting the ICP on tribal lands, Erickson helicopter, all of the CAL FIRE, sheriff, law enforcement folks in our brand new hotel that was closed because of the fire. And so we have worked very hard to develop a relationship prior to that with the county folks in both law enforcement and fire and EMS. So I'm very proud to be here. I am a member of the Tribal Advisory Committee to CalFIRN, and so I am just excited to be here and the opportunity for tribes to be involved in this exercise, I guess, or in the deployment or the development of this future deployment. Quick show of hands, is there anybody in here that represents a tribal community? other than you two, because I came with you, so you guys don't count. How about anybody that actually works in a community that has a tribe? A couple? So there's a little bit of experience out there. So what I want to talk about, let's see, will it go? It's not working. Left. There we go. All right. A little bit overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about California tribal facts, really, and that's for those of you in the room that maybe don't know demographically what's in California with respect to tribes. Talk a little bit about the governance and the tribal consultation, both executive orders and public law that involve tribes specifically in this process. Talk about some of the unique challenges that FirstNet will face in dealing with tribes, not only here in California, but across the country. And then also, too, a little bit about some of the opportunities and benefits that are out there. This is a map, and sorry you can't read it, but if I put the whole state on there, this is just Southern California, and from Hanford down of all the different tribes or tribal entities. As Karen had stated, there are 111 federally recognized tribes with tribal trust land in California alone. There are 566 in the whole United States, and so you can look that there's a lot of areas and very uniqueness. A lot of our tribal communities are located in very remote areas, and it's a long historical discussion for another presentation, but we'd be happy at another time to answer any questions about that. But if you look at California, we're spread out in many different areas. Emergency management, whether it's fire, law enforcement, first responders for tribal communities, is still relatively new. A lot of our tribes who own and operate casinos have to have some type of fire or law enforcement. Others are just beginning. Some completely rely on the federal government or local agencies for services. But tribes now are really growing in their emergency management capabilities because fundamentally, as a sovereign, the tribe has a responsibility to provide for its people in those communities in the tribal lands that it serves. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about the history side of it. Understand, too, that there are many other unrecognized and Native American populations within the state outside of those federally recognized tribes. And again, they're spread out in all different areas throughout the state. Currently, there is approximately 450,000 acres of tribal trust land that those 111 tribes manage and operate. And so when you talk about NEPA and other requirements, yeah, we know about that. We are all too familiar with that. You talk about cell towers, we know about that. We actually have 2 cell towers in our tribal community, 2 different service providers. We talk about governance, Executive Order 13175, which deals specifically with consultation and coordination. So tribes as sovereign entities have a direct relationship with the federal government, and then the feds themselves must actually consult with the tribes directly. Not collectively, all 566, but every single one individually. Every tribe has a right to express and participate in that consultation process. Under Public Law Public Law 280, that's a law enforcement here in California, but Public Law 112-96 specifically when establishing FirstNet allows for tribes to provide input. So there's a mechanism within that law that says that you will consult and work with those tribes and understand what some of the issues are in Indian country so that we could better help build those programs. Then the executive order, which is specific to California, is of course B-10-11, which establishes a direct communication and consultation with the tribes through the governor's office. And the governor's office has a tribal affairs department and staff that specifically work directly with those tribes. And under that executive order, it mandates on all issues pertaining to tribes that the governor does consult and work with the tribes. When we talk about tribal interactions at the national level, Kevin McGinnis, who's a FirstNet national board member, and correct me if I'm wrong for the FirstNet folks that are here. I've met Kevin actually at another national meeting, and he does the lead actually for the tribal outreach. And so he's out there visiting with a lot of the tribes and the tribal communities across the country to be engaged and involved. As I said, it's it's paramount for those tribal communities that are developing the emergency management to work with the outside. In our recent experience with the Rim Fire and the things that we were doing to provide and protect for our community, we need to have constant interaction with the law enforcement, county OES, fire folks there as well, and we worked very well in that type of relationship. But communication is key, so it's great to have a actual designated tribal outreach kind of lead out there. There's also a Public Safety Advisory Committee that I do believe has a tribal representative to it. Nationally, I see shaking of heads, yes. And then Carl Rebstock, who is also one of the leads in the management side. He and I have not physically met in person. We've talked via email, but there is movement out there. And California is definitely being pretty progressive with respect to engaging the tribes in those communities. At the state level, I said for California, Cynthia Gomez, she's the tribal advisor for the governor's office. So she is actually a California tribal member. She's from the Tule River Indian Reservation, north of here. North of here. And so she is very participatory for those tribes and gathering that. And of course, California now has a tribal committee, which I am a member of that newly established committee. That committee is comprised of myself from Tuolumne. Michael Despain is from the Mechoopda tribe in Chico, California. Lenore Lamb is actually with the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs in Riverside County. Matthew Rantanen is from Paula, California, or the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association out of San Diego County. And then Bill Denke is the tribal police chief at Sequan in El Cajon. And so that is the current tribal committee that's advising both Cynthia and Calfern on tribal communities here in California. Some of the challenges, again, in California, there are 111 tribes. There are 566 nationally, so 20% of them are here in California alone. California has a very unique history, federally and relationship-wise, and state relationship-wise with the tribes. But that's a large percentage. 20% of the whole population is here in California. Second to Alaska, which has 229 federally recognized tribes in the state of Alaska alone. In California, according to 2010 census, there's 0.75 million Native Americans that actually reside. Now, that number is not all members of federally recognized tribes that are from California, but there are a lot of Native Americans who reside here in California and are considered a part of that number as well. One of the challenges also, too, is assuring equitable allocation of coverage and bandwidth to the tribal communities, and I cannot stress enough the importance, because of the relationships that tribes now have with their outside providing services. Take Tuolumne, for example. We have a 24/7 engine, structure side of fire. We have a 10-man hand crew. We have 24/7 tribal security, and we provide a lot of mutual aid for no cost to those local communities, both Tuolumne City, Tuolumne County, and we're happy to do that because we train together. We also know that in the event of a disaster or emergency, there are no borders, and that we may have tribal members who live outside of our tribal lands that are going to require those services. So we want those services to be the best they can be. We also want those folks that are coming to help us, CAL FIRE, which has a contract for wildfire on all tribal lands in California, or we may have mutual aid with our county folks, for them to understand and have a working relationship as well. So we are a benefit. So that's a challenge to provide that allocation of coverage to those tribal communities that are in those very, very remote areas that may not have that ability to do so. Limited access, again, is definitely one of those challenges. With 111 tribes, there are some tribal communities that are very in very remote areas. And I think I saw a percentage, 2010, that 19% of all Native Americans in the whole United States still do not have basic landline cell service to their house. Higher percentage, of course, that do not have access to wireless or broadband. We're getting a little bit better in California because the population and the growth and the residential development around tribal communities is definitely different than what it used to be, but definitely that limited access is of a challenge. Coordination definitely can be very, very difficult, and We are pretty proactive in our tribal community. We are very fortunate to have a county that is equally proactive with us, engages with us, participates, trains, writes grants. We talk. We're constantly helping each other. We collaborate. In other counties, that's not always the case. And for whatever reason, whether it's historically or just because of the sheer number of tribes in that county, or the lack of knowledge of the ability to work with those tribes and those mechanisms that are best suited to develop those relationships in emergency response, that coordination definitely can be difficult in trying to get those communities engaged with those tribes and vice versa. Opportunities and benefits, 3-in-1 network will offer services in very remote. We talked about that. I think that's a great offer within FirstNet, committed to bring the service to where the public safety first responders are. Again, as tribal communities, we have first responders, not only for ourselves, but for the local communities that are adjacent to us. We participate in strike teams. We participate. Our engine is up at Hoop, or actually in Lassen right now, our Klamath. Our fire chief, which is California Type 1 IMTIC, Jerry McGowan, is actually ICing the July complex fire up north. There's commercial providers that may be encouraged to augment their services on those areas that are could be provided for tribal communities. Tribes have land. There's some unique benefits in that respect because we don't get regulated on land use from the state on the federal land, even though we have to go through federal NEPA. But we have some mechanism and opportunities with respect to our status and land. The other benefit and opportunity is really to protect some of those areas that would be sacred or cultural to the tribal community, and I think that's important in the development and placement of towers, is understanding and respecting that. And tribes are pretty good at educating the folks that want to come and do business or place anything on tribal lands. Working together offers opportunities and benefits, definitely, and I really want to stress that. If you haven't had an opportunity to work with your local tribe, outreach to them, see what they have. You might be surprised what they're doing and the type of training and the availability of funding that they might get that might help you as well as a neighboring agency. One of the interesting things, too, in the changes in the Stafford Act, the tribes now actually legally, by law, can go straight to the president to declare a disaster or a state of emergency. And there's only been 6 in the United States that actually have had that declaration. But that is a great opportunity for a lot of communities as well. So understand what that is and understand how that can benefit you as a community. Working together, deployment offers opportunity for interagency working relationships. Again, I cannot stress the opportunity and the willingness and encourage that between the tribes and these local agencies, and also with FirstNet and the things that are occurring. In conclusion, I love this picture. I'm a proud mom of a firefighter. That's my daughter there. That's when she was in the academy, and she just got back from a 21-day assignment up in Northern California. But there are some great challenges and opportunities that FirstNet brings. And we were talking, and I brought 2 of my gentlemen, GIS and my tribal security chief, and we were talking about interoperability all the time and how we're trying to improve and how we can communicate amongst our own emergency services on tribal lands, but also the outside. And this is relatively still very, very new. So be just as patient with us as you are with the outside world at educating, because it is going to be a long process, and there are a lot of folks that are going to want to be involved, and a learning curve, and some of us that are still getting very involved. Working has some benefits. It really enables tribes to communicate. And again, at the end of the day, disaster doesn't have borders, and so we have to work together, and we have to be able to communicate, and we can help you just as much as we hope that you will help us. So with that, that's my contact information, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the panel? Okay, thank you very much. Our next agenda item is mission manager application, and each one of our town halls, we're having a public safety application presentation just to have people start thinking about the types of applications that will be able to work over a FirstNet broadband network. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mike Berthelot. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of Mission Manager, and I am very happy to be here and represent our team, and honored that you'd ask us to come up. We're new, but we've been around for a long time, and I promise you that I did not put this presentation together in conjunction with what Brian said earlier, because all the things that he says will happen, we can do right now. We just don't have FirstNet to be able to do them everywhere. So if we can go ahead and play that short little video.
Disasters can change lives in a matter of seconds. When fires, floods, or other disasters strike, Mission Manager improves the effectiveness of first responders so they can carry out their mission to help save lives and property, all with a click of a mouse. Cloud-based and user-friendly, Mission Manager ensures your team is ready to deploy at a moment's notice, whether it be a catastrophic event or single-person rescue. Mission Manager is also used for training missions and public events. Developed by a first responder, Mission Manager is one of the most widely used incident management tools of its kind. It is used in all 50 states and 20 countries, and available in 80 languages. Mission Manager is based on 3 core principles: preparation, readiness, and execution. Success begins with preparation. Designed to be used as a daily tool, Mission Manager ensures member and equipment data is current at all times. The database tracks members' contact information, certifications, and gear. It also tracks your equipment and maintenance schedules. Preparation leads to readiness. Mission Manager helps with the day-to-day management of documents and forms, timekeeping, calendaring, and task delegation. When an event occurs, incident commanders can quickly organize their callouts with drag-and-drop team building, preset mission checklists, and robust mapping capabilities. During the incident, Mission Manager provides simultaneous real-time situational awareness to multiple users. The incident commander can send messages to team members 3 ways: email, text, or voice.
Count. Call 690-555-1212 for more information.
Users can manage missions on the robust map function, which feature over 100 overlays with categories such as topography, weather, and natural hazards. From the field, members can send smartphone photos, such as the shoe of a lost subject, which will appear on the mission map with embedded location data. Every activity in Mission Manager is logged and recorded, providing a second-by-second record of every event. Once the dust has settled, Mission Manager produces automated ICS reports needed for federal reimbursements, debriefs, and legal requirements. From large-scale emergencies to community events, you can count on Mission Manager to help you save lives and property. Mission Manager, cloud-based, affordable, and available now.
That's it, we're done. It's pretty amazing. We'll go ahead and start with the slides here in a second. Mission Manager was actually developed by a first responder in San Diego County who was disappointed that when he was doing search and rescue missions, they started with Thomas maps, drew circles on them, and made photocopies. And he said there had to be a better way. He was also a software developer, so he started working on the Mission Manager product. It then became a hobby that got seriously out of control. It's used by over 1,300 organizations and groups around the world. As we say, it's in 80 languages. Mission Manager has been available for free for 4 years. That's why there's almost 1,300 people using it. We relaunched the product last month because as it grew in use and demands placed on it, it needed more infrastructure. So we moved the servers, we put in a better backup system. There was a comment earlier about how frequently things are backed up. Mission Manager is backed up every second, and those backups are saved for 35 days. So if you were doing a mission in the past when it was backed up once a week, that could be pretty devastating if you're trying to save things. If we can go to the next one, please. It's been used for all kinds of missions. Originally, it was started to be used for search and rescue, but it grew into, we have 20 templates on here. This spring, I was actually in Boston for the Boston Marathon and spent the day with a SWAT team. that was doing security. Fortunately, it was an extremely boring day. But they used Mission Manager not only to lay out their areas of responsibility, where they were going to position their equipment, but also for communication. They needed to get a message out to everyone discreetly and quickly, and they used the Mission Manager text message function to send out a very important message, like what the password was for people to identify each other. It was used in the Ossa, Washington mudslides. It was used in the San Diego fires. Some of the video that is in the video that you just saw is actual video that was recorded in May of 2014 on animal rescue. The American Humane Association is going to be using Mission Manager on their Red Star project for animal rescues. It's designed to be used every day. This is not a, in case of emergency, break glass application. You don't want to have to remember what your password is or where you go to log in. It's designed to track your people, your equipment, and their certifications. So if you need to pull together a team that is field qualified, you can do it with one click of a mouse. It's designed for readiness, which is if we have all the information of our people and our equipment in the system, then how do we move from preparation to readiness? We have a document library, all of your operating plans. At the Boston Marathon, they had all of their operating plans as well as those from other jurisdictions were resident in this library so everybody could see them. Mission Manager can be used by multiple devices in different places. I've actually been in Boston participating in an event in San Diego and seeing the exact same thing that everyone else is seeing. You can use it on a cell phone, you can use it on a iPad, a desktop, or a laptop. People can be doing different things on it at the same time, and everybody's display will update simultaneously. Use it for communications, for assigning tasks, equipment maintenance, PR events. It keeps track of timekeeping so that at the end of the month when you have to turn in how many hours and how many miles did people have, it's all in there. If somebody leaves and forgets, they get an automatic email reminder. So between the preparation and the readiness, having the information in there, being comfortable with using it on a daily basis, that then takes you to execution. Mission Manager is designed to be used by people who are not IT experts. If I can use this, almost anybody can. I still can't program the clock on a VCR if I could find a VCR, but I can use Mission Manager. You use it all the way through, from check-in at the beginning, building your teams, coming up with getting information from the field using photos from smartphones. All of that is in there. Real-time messaging. We can do GPS tracking on a download basis. We're in the process of developing a real-time GPS tracker that will go into smartphones on an app. As the video said, there's over 110 mapping outlays on here. Just about anything you can think of. You can pull up traffic cameras, you can pull up social media, put in a keyword and a time frame, and any post within your search area on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, it will all show up. So if you want to see who's talking about someone, what's going on, it's there. It shows one of the things in San Diego County in search and rescue that's really important is boundaries. And so you can pull up where are all the boundaries between jurisdictions, the tribal lands, things that people have to be sensitive to. Everything is logged by the system automatically. Every change to a screen, every message sent is automatically updated. You can then have your own event log where someone can act as a scribe and put in who came in and who left the room or other things. But if somebody sends in a photo, it's logged. Its geolocation information is logged, the time. At the end, you can pull up all of the forms that you need for ICS reports to get reimbursement on a state or federal level. The only thing that's missing is FirstNet. If FirstNet was there, the single biggest impediment to Mission Manager would be gone. And we're a business. If we could do this for free, we would do this for free. But we can't. So what we have done is tried to put Mission Manager, which is a pretty robust system, so that it is within reach of the smallest communities in the country. 87% of the 20-some thousand law enforcement agencies in the U.S. have fewer than 50 sworn officers. Yet their communities are faced with the same challenges, the same problems. They have floods, they have fires, they have events, and they need these kind of incident management tools. So what we want to be able to do is have as many people as possible use it, and that's reflected in our business model. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'll answer any questions anybody might have.
Questions? No? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And then we have one more presentation, the local first responder perspective. That's Brandon Smith.
Good afternoon. I'm Brandon Smith, Battalion Chief with Kern County Fire. And I'm just going to kind of basically give just an overview of our department and kind of what we entail, what our department has for the county, but also we work with a lot of different agencies, with Bakersfield City, with law enforcement, OES, CAL FIRE, various different agencies, and so communication is huge. So our department basically consists of 46 stations, 2 seasonals. We have over 600 personnel. Response area covers about 8,000 square miles. And in the last census, roughly in Kern County, we're talking about just under 1 million in the population. So pretty significant impact for us on the county side, but also with some of the other agencies that we work with. Various specialty equipment throughout the county that requires communication, data, voice communications, our hazmats, our USAR or urban search and rescues, airport. We have multiple airports throughout the county that some that are protected and some that are just open airports. We have 3 hand crews, one of them being a hotshot crew that goes federal into the federal system, and they can go nationwide. And a lot of this I'm telling you mainly because of, I think, with adding FirstNet or an entity like this that is one single communication data flow is going to be extremely important, making sure that information gets from not only our agency, but if our hotshot crew was deployed back east somewhere, that we're able to supply them with the information prior to getting to the incident. We're a contract county with the state, so we work with CAL FIRE and we respond to state land within the county. We also have various other agencies that we work with throughout the county, as I said, with Bakersfield City, California City, and our dispatch center is a joint center that receives anywhere up to, in the last annual, about 100,000 calls for service. Not only that, but they also work with numerous law enforcement agencies, numerous fire departments, and EMS. Let's see, Kern County, we're also on the fire side, we're the operational area coordinator for the region. So that communication, we could be sending resources anywhere up and down the state to support fires, to support different emergencies going on. Let's see, we have different agreements with our federal agencies. So with the different national forests around us, with Bureau of Land Management, Los Padres, Sequoia, Angeles, and Fish and Wildlife. We have agreements with them that we may respond to emergencies within their area, and vice versa, as they may come in and support us. Our department faces a lot of different challenges. I think we're kind of a unique county in some ways in the fact that we do have that urban interface. We have the ranges, the mountain ranges all around. Then we have the desert side. So many different areas within Kern County that offer kind of some uniqueness to our responses. And in some of those areas, we don't have communication. As an example, just in the past, we had the Shirley fire a couple months ago, and it went up into the Forest Service area, but also some of the state land and Bureau of Land Management. So we had multiple agencies working together, but the communication side, radios work good, but the data side, we had no communication. Cell phones, whether you're using an MDC or mobile data computer, if you're using something like that, you don't have that access, and this is where eventually we'd like to see that broadband come to that. Another example would be many of us carry iPhones, Apple products, Android products, and they have various apps. One of them, as an example, for the first day or so on one of our fires, we didn't have a good perimeter due to the location of the fire and happened to fly in all of our crews. Probably the quickest way to get our perimeter was pull up the iPad, pull up an application, turn on my tracking, flew the fire, and we then had somewhat of a perimeter that we couldn't have gotten without that communication. Of course, we're fortunate to have LTE in that location. Our current, for the county side, our current network system, we work off of the microwave system, and our MDCs for the fire side, we use a commercial side of wireless. We use Verizon and AT&T. And some of the drawbacks with that, of course, it's a commercial entity, and we have areas within the canyon, within the desert, within the mountain areas that don't have that capacity where we lose connection. So if we have an incident, which tends to be quite often, we may have an incident in the canyon. There's a huge disconnect there for us having any communication aside from radio. Our microwave system, as many other agencies are probably dealing with, is becoming outdated. Parts are becoming tougher to find, to replace. Our system is roughly about 10 years old, and I know in the foreseeable future we are looking at replacing it. And this is where I think FirstNet is going to be a big factor of how we replace it and what we do and how we plan for that, because if we're looking at planning in the next 5 to 10 years, we need to make sure that FirstNet has a good layout of what we need to connect to, and vice versa. We need to make sure that we can connect to it also, especially considering it's not cheap to start building out that system. As another example, our dispatch center, we're going through a new CAD process and building up a new CAD. This new one will be compliant with a lot of the future technology, and so having that data flow into FirstNet will be important in making sure that the equipment meets the same demands. And then the last portion of one thing I was going to talk about is having a common operating picture and having a common operating platform. And that is some of the new terminology. Myself, I'm on working with the FireScope working group, which is for emerging technology in the fire service. And these are some of the discussions that we're talking about now. The platforms of what we're using. As an example, the management program, also NICS, the Next Generation Incident Command System. These are multi-platforms that could be hopefully connecting in these outlined areas to where I can actually see a fire perimeter. I can see the infrastructure. I can see what's being threatened at the time, how many homes. I can pull up the census and know what kind of population is in that area immediately as an incident commander. And this is crucial to me. Whenever I go to start doing an evacuation to a local area, I know what the population is there, and I can pass it on to OES as they start to build up our evacuation centers, or what type of population we may have. Is it a special needs population? So a lot of this stuff is going to be there in the future, hopefully, and this is where we have that connection. I know there's a lot of other agencies out there. I'm just talking more on our part as a county as a whole. Some of the, as a recap here, working with all these different agencies, the communication is probably going to be our biggest issue, making sure that data flows, and not only just the data, but also our voice, as in how we want things to operate, how we want things to work, to make sure that it meets our needs, but also it's going to meet the smaller agencies' needs or the larger agencies' needs. LA RICS is a good example. I think it's kind of a small scale on the nationwide scale as to see some of the issues they're going through. Not only do they have to deal with different multiple agencies, but not everybody has the same needs as them, but also egos and the way people do things and the way other agencies do things. These are some of the things that we'll have to overcome. But I foresee FirstNet being a good step to that future. I see it for us as a good step, having that broadband, and hopefully we'll be able to link into that at some point. But and of course, I'd love to see at some point seeing the LMR meet up with it also. Aside from that, any questions?
Does the panel have questions? I just have one comment, and I want to thank you. This is the first time we've had a local perspective at our town hall, our second town hall. And what you bring to the table in your comments are exactly the information that we're going to need as we move forward with identifying what FirstNet needs to be for California. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll move forward to public comment and questions. We do have one person that has identified, like make a public comment, and it's Rebecca Campbell from CalSeek Central Planning Area. And, you know, I'm going to have to defer to Paul to tell you where to make your comments. Sorry.
I think it's on. Good afternoon. Rebecca Campbell. I'm the Deputy CAO at Kings County and also the chair of the CalSeek Central Planning Area. So the CalSeek was just approached from CNIC, which is the Corporation for Education Network Initiative in California. They partnered with CVIN, which are the telephone companies, to put in the next generation broadband network, which is the network installed from Amador County all the way through Kern. And each operational area has a loop that connects to education centers and also has an access for public safety. So I don't know if you've heard of them. Okay, thank you. But they just approached us at CalSeek to see if we want to get on their network for free, they said, for a pilot period. And they didn't define the pilot period. So we've got to go back and talk to our agencies and see if this is something we want to do. And in the meantime, you guys are working forward, and we're not sure if you guys are talking. We're not sure what's happening, if you are going to be using their network. I know that some of the funding came from the NTIA for that project, so my assumption is that, yes, you probably will reach out to them, but I'm just curious on what conversations you've had with them and if this is just more knowledge for us so we can make this decision. And they also recommended that if we do this, that we run concurrently on our current systems and not disable those systems in case we don't want to stay. So.
Okay, and we have spoke to CNIC, and I know they've helped out a lot of areas in California, and that they're very good business. The one thing we don't know is what the requirements will exactly be by FirstNet, so knowing if they will be compatible with FirstNet or not, I don't know, and I don't think we're there yet. So what I'd like to do is have some staff connect with you, and we can go through more detail of what we know, and we can kind of help you weigh out your risks as you move forward.
I think that would be really helpful.
Okay,
Thank you.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and that was it. I just shut my mic off. For public comment. So that is the end of our agenda that we have today. I do want to express to everybody, I would really appreciate everyone filling out the survey. If you have not gotten a copy of the survey, we've gotten email addresses, right, from people that signed up for the meeting today? Yes. So we will send the survey out to everybody that has attended today. Send that out to your friends, coworkers, any of the stakeholders in the public safety world that would be interested, to make sure that we do get all the feedback that we can. We do have our coverage objective workshop scheduled for August 26th. The notice will be going out probably tomorrow. I encourage you, if you don't get the notice, please contact one of our members of our staff today. Juliet, if you could stand up. Juliet in the back will be glad to make sure. Seeing you kind of come over in the light a little bit. We have two folks back there. And I believe their cards were out on the table as well. I want to make sure that we do get participation in our workshop from areas of IT, lots of first responders, and folks on the administration side of public safety. So keep that in mind. That's coming up very shortly. And again, our survey. Our next town hall meeting is scheduled late September. I'm going to throw out the 24th. Is that correct, Sue? It is the 24th. If you've noticed a kind of a theme today, we kind of focused on fire today. We will be focusing I'm not sure if we're doing law enforcement at the next town hall, and then we'll be focusing on EMS. So they kind of have a theme. So if you watched this one or participated in this one, please, the next town hall will be providing additional information. So thank you all for attending. I really appreciate your support, and please fill out that survey. Thanks. Meeting's adjourned.